and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 18th April 2019. The topics to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's begin. This news appears as an article on page number 8 in which the author is saying that the Election Commission of India needs institutional safeguards to protect its autonomy, especially in the wake of recent events. Now, this discussion will fall under GS Paper 2 under the category of appointment to various constitutional posts, powers and functions and responsibility of various constitutional bodies. Now, the broad context of this article is that the Election Commission of India's credibility and conduct has been brought into question in the light of some recent events. The background of the author's article is that recently, on 8th April, a letter was sent to the President by retired bureaucrats and diplomats highlighting the lack of initiative and responsiveness from the Election Commission of India in the face of various incidents of the violation of the Model Code of Conduct. So basically, in their letters, these retired bureaucrats have expressed their concern over the Election Commission's weak-kneed conduct in tackling the violation of the Model Code of Conduct and have said that the Election Commission of India suffers from the crisis of credibility. Now, we will not go into the details of what violations have been made, but in order for you to better understand the context of this article, the letter which was sent to the President mentions a few incidents. The foremost of them is that the March 27th announcement of the anti-satellite missile amounts to giving an unfair publicity to the party in power. Secondly, the launch of the Namo TV without a license, the release of a biopic on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as well as the launch of a web series on the Prime Minister, etc., have all been quoted as an example which will provide free publicity to the party in power. Hence, in the letter it was stated that since all of these will provide a free publicity, hence the expenditure for all of these should be debited as election expenditure in the name of the candidate in question. In addition to these two, there are certain other incidents where the Model Code of Conduct has been violated by various top leaders by spreading hate or divisive speeches in their political rallies and speeches. Hence, keeping in mind all these incidents, a general concern is looming large amongst the bureaucrats and the intelligentsia of this country, especially regarding the Election Commission of India's credibility in controlling and abating such violations of the Model Code of Conduct. Now, as per the author, the origin of this problem lies in the flawed system of appointment as well as removal of the election commissioners. Now, as far as the appointment is concerned, Article 324 of the Indian Constitution categorically states that the Chief Election Commissioner as well as other election commissioners shall be appointed by the President. So currently today, the appointment of the members of the Election Commission, which is an independent body, is made by the President of India, who of course makes such an appointment with the aid and consultation of the Council of Ministers. So the author is saying that from the current system of appointment by the President, the appointments should be made through a broad-based consultation which can be most effectively exercised through a system of collegium. A system of collegium for the appointment of the election commissioners has been recommended by the Law Commission of India in its 255th report. And as per the Law Commission, a collegium consisting of the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition, as well as the Chief Justice of India should make appointments of the members of the Election Commission of India. In addition to the Law Commission, even during the end of last year, a PIL was filed in the Supreme Court which said that there should be a fair, just and transparent process for the selection of the election commissioners by constituting a neutral and independent collegium or selection committee. Now, moving ahead to the system of removal, the author of this article has presented a very interesting side to this issue. Now, as far as the removal is concerned, the proviso of Article 324, Clause 5 mentions that the Chief Election Commissioner shall not be removed from his office except in like manner and on the same grounds as a judge of the Supreme Court. Now, what is interesting is that this proviso only mentions the Chief Election Commissioner's ground of removal. Hence, it is only the Chief Election Commissioner who is protected from being removed except through the process of impeachment, just like a judge of the Supreme Court. So in his article, the author is saying that this kind of protection of removal should also be extended to the other two election commissioners. That is to say, even the other two election commissioners should have the same manner and grounds of removal just like the Chief Election Commissioner. Hence, the process of removal of the Chief Election Commissioner and the other two election commissioners should be brought on the same footing. Now, as per the author, one of the probable reasons for this discrepancy could be that when this constitution was envisaged, that time there was only one election commissioner of India. Therefore, the author says that the constitution gave protection to the Chief Election Commissioner as it was a one-man commission initially. But now, since 1990, it has been more like a convention that the Election Commission of India will be a three-member body. Hence, the author feels that even the other two election commissioners should be brought in same footing to the Chief Election Commissioner of India as far as removal is concerned. The reason for this is that otherwise the election commissioners have equal or rather same voting powers as the Chief Election Commissioner. Now, the author feels that this equal voting power in the absence of the same process of removal can challenge the independence of the Election Commission. And the reason he has provided is that in the absence of a proper removal process, the two other election commissioners are very vulnerable to the government pressure. Therefore, it is very much possible that the government can control a defiant Chief Election Commissioner of India through the majority voting power of these other two commissioners. That is to say, the other two commissioners, under the pressure of the government, can outvote a defiant Chief Election Commissioner of India, and this will put the independence and autonomy of the Election Commission of India into question. Hence, in the light of this discrepancy, the author is suggesting that the removal process of all the members of the Election Commission of India should be similar. The final issue which the author raises in his article is in relation to the deregistering of political parties by the Election Commission of India. Now, currently, under Section 29A of the Representation of the People's Act 1951, the Election Commission of India is only empowered to register a political party. Therefore, under the Representation of the People's Act and even otherwise, the Election Commission of India has no power when it comes to deregistering of a political party. Though cancellation orders can be passed under some specific circumstances, which again is elaborated by the Supreme Court in its judgment, but the general power to deregister a political party, even for the gravest of violations of the Constitution, has not been provided to the Election Commission of India. And even recently, the Election Commission of India in February have filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court saying that it wants to be empowered to deregister a political party, particularly in the view of its constitutional mandate of superintendence, direction and control of elections and their conduct in India. Hence, the third issue is granting of the deregistering power to the Election Commission of India. So basically, these were the 3 points which were raised by the author in this article, which was in relation to the appointment of the members of the Election Commission, the removal process of the other two Election Commissioners of India, as well as giving the Election Commission of India the power to deregister a political party. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 5 and says that the Chenchu tribes have started to domesticate fox because they believe that the fox brings in good fortune. However, as per the Indian Wildlife Protection Act, hunting or domesticating a fox is an offence. Hence, our discussion will fall under the category of environment. Now, as mentioned, the context of the article is that the Chenchus believe that seeing the face of the fox at the beginning of the day is a fortune, and thus they have started to domesticate fox. But the conservation of the fox falls under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, under which hunting or domestication of fox is prohibited and is also an offence. Now, as far as the Wildlife Protection Act is concerned, the Act's main aim is to provide protection to plants as well as animal species. Now, this Act basically has 6 schedules which give a varying degree of protection. Schedule 1 and 2 provide absolute protection, and the offences which are prescribed under these schedules attract the highest penalties. Further, Schedule 3rd and Schedule 4th covers the species which are also protected, but the penalties for their offence is much lower. Schedule 5th deals with animals which may be hunted, and Schedule 6 is about all those endemic plants which are not allowed to be cultivated or planted. Now, as far as the Indian fox or the Bengal fox is concerned, its IUCN status is least concerned, and for its distribution, the Indian fox is found throughout India from the Himalayas in the north to the southernmost India. Usually, this Indian fox is found in areas next to the villages, especially around the cultivated fields and buns. In addition to the Indian fox, the other species of fox which is found in India is the red fox. And this red fox is usually found in the Himalayas, and its IUCN status is also least concerned. Now, as far as the Chenchu tribe is concerned, these Chenchus are aboriginal tribe mainly found in the states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Further, the Chenchu tribe is a particularly vulnerable tribal group in the state of Andhra Pradesh. For the purpose of the list of particularly vulnerable tribal groups, Telangana will also come under Andhra Pradesh. Next, the Chenchus still prefer hunting and gathering over farming and in fact earn their living by selling meat. Lastly, the origin of the Chenchu tribe is connected to Lord Mallikarjun of the Sri Salem temple. Therefore, all the information which we discussed today can be of relevance from the perspective of your preliminary examination. With this, let's move on to our next news. This next news appears on page number 10 and states that a recent study conducted by Harvard University has stated that zinc deficiency is rising amongst Indians and that there is a direct correlation between increased carbon dioxide emissions and zinc deficiency. This discussion will fall under the category of science as well as social issues as it talks about health as well. Now, as per the finding of this study, zinc deficiency in India has increased by almost 25% between the years 1980 to 2012. Hence, in a way, this has added additional 82 million population to become zinc deficient. Now, the study has cited several reasons for this growing zinc deficiency. The first one of them is the rice-dominated diets. The study has found that zinc deficiency was concentrated in the southern and the northeastern states which have rice-dominated diets. These states include Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Manipur, Meghalaya, etc. The second reason for this is the climate change. Now, due to climate change, there has been an increase in the carbon emission in the world, hence the concentration of carbon is increasing. And this increase in carbon emission is causing our crops to become nutrition or nutrient deficient. And mainly due to such carbon emission, the crops are becoming zinc as well as protein deficient. And the third reason is the change in the nutritional diets of the people. Now, more and more people, including the rural population, is moving towards a rice-dominated diet from their traditional coarse cereal diets such as jawar, ragi, barley, etc. In addition to this, the urban population also does not consume a diet which is rich in nutrient and in fact consume more of sugar in their diets. Hence, due to the change in the dietary patterns as well, zinc deficiency is increasing. Now, the study has suggested a few steps that can be taken to reverse the trend of zinc deficiency. The first and rather a short-term solution would be biofortification. In biofortification, white rice can be biofortified with zinc as a short-term solution. Second would be to promote better and much balanced diets amongst the population and creating an awareness in them about the ill effects of not consuming proper micronutrients and vitamins. And the third and the long-term solution would be to reduce the carbon emissions of the world. Lastly, about zinc. Zinc is a micronutrient which plays a very essential role in building immunity of the body, in the bone and the brain development, as well as is very essential component for a number of enzymes that are required for cellular functions such as the cell growth. As far as the dietary sources of zinc is concerned, zinc can be taken from dairy products like milk and cheese. It is also abundantly found in leguminous plants like the chickpeas, lentils, etc. and is also found in whole grains like wheat, oats, etc. Hence, the major thing which you need to remember in this discussion is the reason for the zinc deficiency, especially the direct correlation between the carbon emissions and the zinc deficiency. With this, let's move on to our next news. Now this news appears on page number 7 and saying to mark the World Heritage Day on April 18th, all the centrally protected monuments in the country can be visited free of charge. So as part of a discussion, we'll be talking about the World Heritage Day and UNESCO. Now the World Heritage Day is observed every year on 18th April to celebrate and promote the cultural heritage across the globe. This World Heritage Day was proposed by the International Council on Monuments in the year 1982. The International Council on Monuments is an NGO which works for the conservation and protection of cultural heritage places. And this proposal by the International Council on Monuments was approved by the UNESCO General Assembly in the year 1983. Now every year, the International Council on Monuments proposes a theme for the celebrations. And the theme for the year 2019 is Rural Landscapes. Now as far as the UNESCO World Heritage Sites are concerned, these UNESCO World Heritage Sites are places of cultural or natural heritage as described in the UNESCO World Heritage Convention of 1972. Now in the past 5 years alone, India has managed to get almost 7 of its sites on the World Heritage list of UNESCO. And currently, India has 37 World Heritage Sites. Out of these 37 sites, 29 are cultural sites, 7 are natural sites, and only 1 is a mixed site. The one mixed site is the Kanchenjunga National Park, which was awarded the status of a mixed site in the year 2016. Further, as far as the ranking of India is concerned, in the Asia Pacific region, India is ranked second after China, and in the overall global ranking of India in terms of number of World Heritage Sites is 6th in the world. Therefore, since today was the World Heritage Day, all these centrally protected monuments can be visited free of charge. And some of these centrally protected monuments are the Purana Killa, Golconda Fort, Fort St. George, etc. With this, let's move on to our next news. Now this news appears on page number 14 and talks about the rising prices of the cotton. Now our discussion will fall under both the category of economics as well as geography. Now the context of this article is that as per the estimates of the Confederation of the Indian Textile Industry, there can be a fall or decline in the cotton production in the year 2018 to 19, mainly because of drought condition in many of the crop growing regions of our country. Now this apprehension has led to an increase in the prices of cotton by more than 5% during the last month. Hence it is felt that this increase in the cotton prices may have an adverse impact on the textile industry as well as the cotton trade as a whole. Therefore, in this regard, all the cotton traders and the Textile Industry Association have sought the meeting of the Cotton Advisory Board at the earliest. Now, this Cotton Advisory Board is a representative body of the government agencies, growers, industry and trade and has been constituted by the Ministry of Textile. Let us now know a few things about cotton production in India. Now, as far as cotton production in India is concerned, India is the only country where all 4 cultivated species of cotton are grown on a commercial scale. Further, India has the largest area in the world under cotton production. Next, India is the second largest producer after China and second largest exporter after United States of America in the world. And lastly, India is also the second largest consumer of cotton in the world. Now, as far as the geographical or climatic conditions with respect to the production of cotton is concerned, cotton is grown as a kharif crop in India. The temperature condition of cotton is that it requires warm and humid climate and a temperature between 20 to 28 degrees Celsius is best suited. As far as rainfall is concerned, anything between 55 to 100 centimeter is good for cotton production, but rainfall during the harvesting of the cotton is very harmful for it. Another very important thing about cotton is that cotton requires 180 frost-free days. As far as the soil is concerned, cotton grows well in fertile soil which has a high water retention capacity. Hence, loamy and black soil are suited for it. Lastly, in India, the states of Gujarat, Maharashtra, MP and Karnataka lead in cotton production. With this, let's move on to our next news. This next news is an editorial appearing on page number 8 and is in the reference to the recent Election Commission's decision to put a restraining order on 4 politicians for violating the Moral Code of Conduct. Now, this topic and the entire issue, along with the background, has been covered comprehensively in yesterday's DNS, that is 17th April 2019. You can refer to this DNS for more information on this issue. Let's move on to our next news. Now, the next news appears as data point on page number 9 and is talking about the growing joblessness in India. Now, this data is based on a research which was done by the Azim Premji University. But since this is a private organization, it will not be that relevant from the UPSC perspective. But various other official survey reports and their terms of reference has been covered comprehensively in the DNS dated 1st April 2019. You can refer to this DNS if you wish to know more on this topic. With this, let's move on to our practice questions. Now, based on our discussion, here is your first set of the prelims practice question. Please pause the video and solve them. We'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. Question number 1 is with respect to the Chenchu tribe. The first statement, Chenchu tribe belongs to the state of Odisha. This is incorrect. They belong to the state of Andhra Pradesh plus Telangana. Second, it is classified as a particularly vulnerable tribe. Now, this is a correct statement. Hence, the right answer to this question is B, 2 only. Question number 2 is in reference to the World Heritage Sites in India. The first statement, Kanchenjunga is the only mixed World Heritage Site in India. This is a correct statement. Second, India has the most numbers of World Heritage Sites in Asia. This is incorrect. It is not India but China who ranks 1 in the Asia Pacific region. India ranks 2nd in the Asia Pacific region after China. Hence, the right answer is A, 1 only. Now, here is your second set of prelims practice question. Please again pause the video and we'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. Question number 3 is in reference to the cotton production in India. The first statement, India is the largest exporter of the cotton in the world. This is incorrect. It is not India but the United States of America, which is the largest exporter. Second, cotton requires minimum 180 frost-free days in a year for its growth. This is a correct statement. Hence, the right answer is B, 2 only. Question number 4 is in reference to the Election Commission of India. The first statement, Election Commission of India is a constitutional 5-member body. Now, this is an incorrect statement due to the term 5. It is a constitutional body under Article 324 and is not a 5-member but a 3-member body. Second, since they are appointed by the President, they hold the office during the pleasure of the President. Now, this is again an incorrect statement. Though the members are appointed by the President, they do not hold the office during the pleasure of the President and have a fixed term of 6 years. Further, the Chief Election Commissioner of India can be removed on the same grounds as a judge of the Supreme Court. Hence, the right answer is D, neither 1 nor 2. With this, we come to an end for today's discussion. Let's move to the question for the day.